Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of truly astonishing sources. We're talking a mix of breaking news reports, social media transcripts, and these incredibly specific, almost surreal readouts of official press conferences. And we try to make sense of what is, frankly, one of the most shocking geopolitical events of our time.
We are talking, of course, about Operation Absolute Resolve. On January 3rd, 2026, in the very early morning, the United States military executed this massive and highly successful kinetic strike right in the heart of Caracas, Venezuela.
Yeah, and this whole thing culminated in the swift capture of the country's embattled leader, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores.
Our sources give us this incredible lens on a dramatic 48 hours. I mean, we get to see the whole arc.
You really do. We go from that initial uncertainty and chaos, the classic fog of war, where all the analysts are debating whether this is just a bombing run or the start of a full-scale invasion.
Right, and then it just snaps into focus. We get these cold, hard, and remarkably candid details from the U.S. administration itself.
And it's that rationale that why the administration says they did this that really sets this whole deep dive apart.
So our mission today is to synthesize this really volatile, rapidly unfolding story for you. We're going to track the action chronologically, from the first signs of U.S. boots on the ground to the moment they actually give the operation its official name.
And then we have to pivot. We have to analyze the two major, and you could say competing justifications that the White House provided. One is all about narcoterrorism.
And the other is an explicit, completely unvarnished economic mandate. And that's where things get really interesting.
And finally, of course, we have to look at the immediate, very aggressive geopolitical fallout. So this deep dive, it has to tackle the core question. How did this unprecedented military action unfold with such stunning precision? What does this explicit declaration of occupation actually mean for, the whole concept of national sovereignty?
And what message does this send? I mean, to other non-allied, resource-rich nations all around the world.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this dramatic day. We're going to start in the pitch black hours, just before dawn in Caracas.
The event kicks off deep in the night, Venezuelan time, which, is a classic strategic choice. You go for maximum surprise, minimum collateral damage.
Right. And the reports, they just start flooding in on January 3rd, 2026 at around 2 a.m. local time. People in Caracas are being jarred awake by the sound of explosions.
And witnesses are describing seeing these very, very low-flying aircraft and these significant plumes of black smoke just rising over the capital city.
In that initial phase, it's just pure confusion. The targets, according to these early unconfirmed reports, were primarily, it seemed, strategic military sites, infrastructure.
And there were some specific reports that gained a lot of traction, later got confirmed, that the strikes actually hit the defense minister's home.
Which everyone at first interpreted as a classic decapitation strike, right? You take out the head of the military.
Exactly. But that's where the confusion really starts to set in.
Yeah.
Because if the goal was to just instantly disable the entire military command structure, well, the fact that the defense minister was later confirmed to have posted a video statement.
Right. He's on video, maybe under duress, who knows, but he's there.
It indicated that the strike hadn't completely taken out the chain of command, or at the very least, that some leadership was still in place, ready to resist or, offer a counter-narrative.
But the thing that really shifted the analysis wasn't just the explosions, it was the assets they were using.
Yes, that's the key. Sources immediately confirmed the presence of these large, very distinctive tandem rotor aircraft, Chinook helicopters.
And Chinooks are not surgical strike vehicles. These are massive troop carriers. They're what you use to insert special forces.
Exactly. The second you see Chinooks, you know this is something much deeper than just an airstrike, a drone strike, or a precision bomb. That's a finite action. It happens, and it's over.
But landing special forces, that implies a physical objective. You're trying to seize a person, grab intelligence, or, secure territory.
That is the critical distinction we found across all the source material. Military analysts immediately flagged this deployment as, and this is a quote, insanely risky.
And it is. You're flying Chinooks, which are slower, they're bigger, relatively vulnerable, even with a heavy escort over an enemy capital.
A city that theoretically can mount a serious defense. You're talking about anti-aircraft batteries, maybe even shoulder-fired missiles. To do that implies the U.S. military had just overwhelming confidence in its intelligence and its air superiority.
That sheer audacity, that level of risk, it just led to this intense speculation. So what was the ultimate goal? Was this the decapitation strike we talked about, a raid to just grab one person?
Or was this the beginning of something much, much larger? Analysts were really struggling to figure out if this was, and this is another quote, just dick away from, a show of force with a special ops team.
Or, and this is the scary part, if the U.S. was securing the airport so we can lay armor there.
Which suggests a full conventional invasion force is on its way.
And the logistics of that, they really start to back up that second interpretation, the invasion theory.
Right, because if the U.S. plans to bring in tanks, supplies, a large troop presence, they need massive transport aircraft. We're talking C-17s, C-5 Galaxies.
And the local military air base near Caracas, everyone knows it's way too small to handle that kind of consistent heavy lift traffic from the U.S.
So the only option is the nearby international airport, like ATS Simon Bolivar. Securing that airport became the presumed absolutely critical objective of that initial ground action.
And to do that, to secure a major international airport, you need a pretty substantial initial force.
Which explains the high-risk commitment of those special forces teams that were delivered by the Chinooks. The situation was just escalating by the hour after those first explosions.
Then we get the clearest external signal that this wasn't just some quick raid. This was preparation for a massive military movement. It came from the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration.
Yeah, the FAA. At 6 a.m. on January 3rd, they issue a notice to airmen, a no-tail.
And it's a blanket prohibition. All flights, commercial, private, anything, are banned from flying over the entire territory of Venezuela.
That is a staggering assertion of control. It's the U.S. basically declaring Venezuelan airspace a protected military operational zone.
It's a sign that you're getting ready for large-scale, sustained logistics. You're not just planning a clean escape. It confirmed for analysts all over the world that the U.S. was asserting essentially martial authority over an entire nation's skies.
And all this preparation led to these intense historical comparisons among the commentators. They immediately started questioning the long-term strategy.
I mean, we've seen this movie before, right? When the U.S. removes a dictator, like with Saddam Hussein, it creates this massive security vacuum.
And it often requires a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar occupation just to maintain some semblance of order and, try to manufacture a functional replacement government.
One analyst really hammered this point. If this was just a quick decapitation strike, who was going to replace the entire political and economic infrastructure of Venezuela?
The U.S. was not seen as having some fully fleshed-out nation-building plan ready to go. Certainly not one that had any kind of domestic Venezuelan consent.
The central strategic concern was that just removing Maduro, the head of this criminal network, the Cartel de los Soles, wouldn't actually remove the network itself.
Exactly. A rival, a crony, maybe even someone like the opposition figure, Maria Corina Machado, who is being discussed in the sources, they could just step into that vacuum.
But without dismantling the entire political, military, criminal machine Maduro was sitting on top of, the whole intervention would be strategically, pointless in the long run.
The underlying assumption from many analysts was that the goal was always to replace the Venezuelan leadership with one that was, quote, favorable to American business interests.
Primarily oil.
Primarily oil. But to get that, you need more than just kidnapping the head of state. You need operational control of the actual assets on the ground.
Which brings us to the shocking clarity that came next. The initial fog was thick, but the administration was about to burn it all off with a massive press conference.
Okay, so let's make that pivot from the chaos and confusion to, to stunning competence.
Yeah.
Within hours of all that military noise, the administration steps forward with this overwhelming, almost unbelievable transparency.
They confirm the mission was a success, and they give it this powerful, very descriptive name, Operation Absolute Resolve.
And that name, it really speaks volumes, doesn't it? It frames the action not as some limited strike, but as a commitment, an absolute resolve.
Right. Executed with overwhelming American military power. And it's coordinated across land, sea, air, and even space.
The official objective, as they stated it, was to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice and to apprehend him and his wife, Celia Flores.
And the legal pretext for this had been very carefully constructed over the years. This wasn't out of the blue.
Not at all. Maduro and Flores were already indicted in the Southern District of New York on very serious charges: narcoterrorism, drug trafficking.
So the military action gets officially framed as a high-stakes, kinetic, but ultimately a law enforcement function.
Exactly. A law enforcement function supported by the massive assets of the U.S. military, complete with a standing $50 million reward for their capture.
But when you dissect the execution details, the sheer scale of the planning and the resources they committed, It's just staggering.
We know this wasn't an impulsive decision. Sources confirmed it was the culmination of many, many months of meticulous planning and rehearsal. It was described as discreet, precise, and conducted during the darkest hours of the night.
The coordination involved. It was a genuine display of joint force capability. I mean, the military brass provided figures that just stunned defense correspondents. Over 150 aircraft were launched across the Western Hemisphere.
150. This wasn't just a few planes. You're talking about a composite air wing. It had F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs for primary air superiority and threat suppression.
And that detail, it addresses the risk we were just talking about. The F-22s and F-35s are crucial because their stealth and their advanced sensors, they basically guarantee total control of the air picture.
But the real technological edge, I think, probably came from other platforms, like the EA-18G Growlers.
The electronic warfare jets.
Exactly. The Growlers would have been tasked with blinding Venezuelan radar systems, jamming all their military communications, basically carving a silent, protected corridor for those low-flying Chinooks to just slip right into downtown Caracas.
And the coordination went way beyond just air assets. They were leveraging intelligence from every corner of the U.S. government. The CIA for covert human intelligence.
The NSA for signals intelligence, and the NGA. And for the listener, the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, would have been absolutely crucial here.
Absolutely critical. The NGA provides this hyper-accurate satellite mapping, three-dimensional modeling. For a surgical raid on a target like a presidential residence, that kind of intel is vital.
You're planning precise ingress and egress routes. You're avoiding potential obstacles. You're calculating everything down to the second. The seamless coordination of all these forces, air, ground, space, maritime, it was lauded for its breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence.
We even have a narrative of the physical confrontation itself. The sources say the insertion helicopters did come under fire when they got to the target area.
Probably from the immediate security forces on site.
Right. But the U.S. teams replied with what the administration called overwhelming force and self-defense, and they just neutralized the threat immediately.
And that leads us to the moment of capture. The story is that Maduro was trying to get to a secure, steel-reinforced safe room inside his compound.
But the narrative from the military suggested he just hoped. He wasn't able to fully close the door in time before the special forces breached the outer perimeter.
The specificity here is almost cinematic.
It really is. The military brass were quick to point out that even if he had closed the door, they estimated their demolition teams could have blown it up in, and I quote, about 47 seconds, regardless of how thick the door was.
47 seconds? That detail, that's not an accident. It's designed to communicate complete, total operational dominance, that they had a plan for every single contingency.
But here's where we need to introduce the critical skepticism that we found across a lot of the independent sources.
Yes, because the administration hammered this point home again and again. This massive, complex operation resulted in a major triumph. Not a single American service member was killed, and not a single piece of American equipment was lost.
0 U.S. casualties, despite flying Chinooks into a defended capital city.
And while, on one hand, that's a testament to the planning and competence, on the other, it immediately raised a massive red flag for analysts.
Is that 0 casualty figure really a result of overwhelming force?
Or does it confirm the widespread speculation that Venezuelan insiders, specifically high-ranking generals, had already cut a deal?
That's the question. Multiple sources suggested that the low resistance they encountered, the minimal combat for such a high-value, high-risk target, it indicated complicity.
It's very possible that the U.S. had secured an agreement with key members of the Venezuelan military who basically agreed to let Maduro be taken.
In exchange for what? Future security, amnesty, maybe continued power in whatever new administration comes next.
It completely transforms the narrative. It goes from a spectacular military victory to a spectacular political intelligence coup.
Right. So whether he was captured by stealth or by collusion, Maduro and Flores were quickly secured. They were whisked away by helicopter directly to the USS Iwo Jima, which was an amphibious assault ship waiting in the Caribbean.
And from there, they were immediately transferred to New York to face those indictments.
The final layer of justification that the administration provided was all about geopolitical framing. They asserted that Venezuela had become this hotbed for U.S. adversaries.
They mentioned operations by Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, and China, all operating directly in the Western Hemisphere.
So, by removing Maduro, the U.S. argued they weren't just arresting a drug kingpin. They were conducting a defensive move.
A defensive move necessary to reestablish American deterrence and dominance in the Western Hemisphere against, these malign foreign actors.
And that narrative was absolutely crucial for justifying the massive scale of this military action to Congress and the international community.
It sets the stage for the dramatic political shift that comes next. The military operation was flawless, 0 casualties, target secured. But now we have to pivot to why the administration was so eager to share that story.
Because the reasoning they gave wasn't just about neutralizing an enemy, it was about the ledger sheet.
Moving beyond the military spectacle, we get to the press conference. And this is frankly where the story moves from an unprecedented military action to a level of political candor that is just genuinely shocking.
It really is. The official justification, it was meticulously layered. First, they led with the law enforcement angle.
Right. Arresting 2 indicted fugitives, stopping Maduro, who they called the kingpin of a vast criminal network. They went into detail about his alleged oversight of the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns.
Which is this transnational criminal organization that's reportedly run by military and government officials inside Venezuela.
And they were very specific about the domestic threat this posed to the U.S. The administration detailed the colossal amounts of deadly drugs being trafficked, but they also really emphasized Maduro's alleged role in sending savage and murderous gangs into the United States.
And they named one specifically, the prison gang, Tren de Aragua.
Naming Tren de Aragua was a very calculated political move. This gang, it originated in Venezuelan prisons, but it has rapidly expanded its footprint all across Latin America, and it's been recently linked to criminal activities in major U.S. cities.
So by connecting the Venezuelan leadership directly to domestic street crime and drug deaths in America, the administration tried to justify the intervention as a necessary act of homeland defense.
Not just foreign policy.
Exactly. But what absolutely stunned political analysts, what caused this immediate widespread international condemnation, was the introduction of the second and arguably the primary rationale.
The explicit America First economic mandate.
This press conference, led by the President, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and Secretary Marco Rubio, it was so explicit about the economic goals, it just tore down the usual diplomatic facade.
The president just flatly stated that the operation was about getting back the oil that was stolen from us. He emphasized that Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves.
But that years of corruption and mismanagement had left its infrastructure badly broken. The country was, in his words, pumping almost nothing compared to its historical potential.
And here is where the specific and incredibly controversial plan for resource seizure becomes absolutely clear.
The administration stated that the goal was to have very large U.S. oil companies, the biggest in the world. We're talking about major players like Chevron or ExxonMobil, go into Venezuela.
Spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
This is the critical, just jaw-dropping detail that analysts all seized on. Because of the inherent political risk, the operational risk of working in a failed state environment, U.S. oil companies were not willing to go back on their own.
And the president confirmed this. He said the U.S. government would reimburse these U.S. oil companies for their initial multi-billion-dollar investment and all their operational work.
From the money coming out of the ground.
Let's just break down the significance of that reimbursement mechanism, because this is the core of the whole thing. It's a massive transfer of sovereign wealth.
Our sources confirmed that U.S. oil companies have been polled about this before, about returning to Venezuela. And the answer was a hard no.
And why? Because Venezuelan crude is heavy, it's poor quality, it's very difficult to refine. Extracting it is generally not profitable at current market prices, even if they own the fields outright.
So, the intervention only makes economic sense for U.S. companies if the U.S. government completely underwrites the risk. The administration is essentially providing a political and a financial guarantee.
They use the military to eliminate the political risk, that's Maduro, and then they eliminate the economic risk by promising to pay the companies back for their investment and their operating costs.
Using Venezuelan oil revenues as collateral.
It transforms the intervention from an arrest operation into a military-backed financial guarantee. It's a mechanism for the direct funneling of nationalized Venezuelan assets to U.S. corporate interests.
And the U.S. government is the ultimate facilitator and risk guarantor. It's a self-financing occupation designed to secure a guaranteed return on investment for a few select private sector partners.
The lack of pretense here was just extraordinary. Commentators noted that even during the 2003 Iraq invasion, the U.S. spent a year trying to manufacture international consent based on claims of WMDs.
Right, there was at least a facade.
Here, the administration was basically saying, we want the oil, we need to underwrite the cost for U.S. corporations to get it, and we are going to use military force to secure that financial transaction.
And following that logic, the administration then committed to an open-ended U.S. administration of the country. And this was the most controversial line of the entire press conference.
He said, we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. We're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place.
I mean, that is an open, unambiguous declaration of temporary military and administrative occupation.
And when the president was asked what judicious transition even meant, he implied it meant ensuring the infrastructure was rebuilt, the oil was flowing, and U.S. financial interests were secured before they would hand power over to any new government.
The president also confirmed he was not afraid of boots on the ground, confirming U.S. forces would remain in Venezuela, partially for security, but crucially also for oil expertise and managing the extraction process.
Which is a direct operational link between the military presence and the economic goal. There's no hiding it.
And reinforcing this whole fiscal plan, the president stressed the operation won't cost us a penny.
Because the U.S. would be reimbursed by the wealth flowing from the ground. This is the key comparison point to previous long, expensive conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan.
This intervention is framed as a self-funding endeavor. The cost of the military operation and the subsequent occupation is fully covered by the resources they seize.
It's the explicit justification of resource extraction, covering the costs of military intervention, all wrapped up in a law enforcement pretext. This unprecedented candor just immediately set the stage for a massive domestic and international constitutional crisis.
And the reaction, both at home and internationally, it was instantaneous and deeply polarized. Let's start with the political fight at home, because this action immediately triggered a constitutional showdown on Capitol Hill.
Secretary Rubio was the administration's point person on the legal justification for this. He quickly came out and claimed the operation was a trigger-based mission. He said it was primarily a law enforcement function apprehending indicted fugitives.
Not an act of war against a sovereign nation.
Right, and that was the official reasoning for not notifying Congress beforehand. Rubio argued that telling Congress was just impractical. It was too risky because of the pervasive issue of leaks on Capitol Hill.
He claimed a leak could have compromised the Special Forces teams and endangered the whole mission.
But that argument just immediately clashed with constitutional reality. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Bernie Sanders, they led the condemnation.
They argued that any kinetic military action against the command structure of a sovereign nation, especially one involving 150 aircraft and ground forces, that constitutes an act of war.
Or, at the very least, it requires consultation under the War Powers Act. They argued the administration had illegally bypassed Congress and basically usurped its authority to declare war.
Sanders specifically called the action rank imperialism. He said it recalled the darkest chapters of U.S. interventions in Latin America, and he started naming historical examples where the U.S. used military force to install client regimes for economic gain.
And Schumer expressed this deep fear. He warned the American people that the U.S. planned to now run Venezuela, and he reminded the public of the devastating human and financial cost of previous open-ended occupations.
The consensus among the critics was that the blatant focus on oil extraction made this intervention arguably more transparent, and because of that, more alarming than any prior action.
Meanwhile, the deposed regime, they were not silent. Venezuela Vice President Delcy Rodriguez quickly gave a televised address.
And she stated emphatically that Maduro is the only president of Venezuela, and she just completely denied the legitimacy of the U.S. action.
Her statement was a direct political counterpunch. Rodriguez described the U.S. action as an unprecedented military aggression and an illegal kidnapping. She demanded the immediate release of Maduro and Flores.
And her speech, it directly mirrored Maduro's own long-held anti-imperialist rhetoric.
Yes, she asserted that the U.S. objective was not some drug war, but regime change, and the seizure of our energy, mineral, and natural resources. She declared that the country will never again be anyone's colony.
This brings us to the profound confusion over who is actually supposed to be running the country now, and the drama surrounding the opposition figures.
Right, because the most recognized opposition leader on the international stage was Maria Corina Machado. She'd been positioning herself for months to take the reins.
Yet the president, during that press conference, just dismissed her, immediately and openly.
He said she didn't have the necessary support within or the respect within the country to be an interim leader. And that effectively just isolated her from the U.S. transition plan.
It signals a fundamental shift in U.S. priorities. Machado, despite having previously shown alignment with U.S. geopolitical interests, she praised Israel. She talked about moving the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem.
She was deemed politically inadequate for the task of stabilizing the country under U.S. control. The U.S. prioritized internal control and stability over established democratic opposition figures.
So instead of Machado, the U.S. seemed focused on Vice President Delcy Rodriguez.
The very same person who had just denounced the U.S. action on television.
It's bizarre. The president initially quoted Rodriguez as saying, "We'll do whatever you need," implying she quickly complied. But then he later sort of softened that, adding that she really doesn't have a choice.
That ambiguity is crucial. The implied plan wasn't to install a figurehead, but to force compliance from the existing political structure or the military brass.
So they intend to work with Rodriguez, even calling her quite gracious, while acknowledging she was picked by Maduro and is a deeply compromised figure.
But the actual plan, as the president stated it, was for the U.S. to run the country with a group, and he explicitly named himself Rubio, Hegseth, and General Kane.
Which suggests the real strategy was to broker a deal with the Venezuelan military leadership, or maybe another compliant figure, a general, maybe even a cartel leader, to act as the temporary administrator under U.S. direction.
Someone who can guarantee compliance while allowing the U.S. to maintain the legal fiction that a Venezuelan is still technically in charge.
And if we turn to the international stage, the reaction was, just as you'd expect, divisive. It highlighted all the major fault lines in global diplomacy.
Latin America was immediately split. Among U.S. allies, Argentina's President Javier Milei quickly praised Venezuela's new freedom and endorsed the U.S. action.
But major regional powers immediately condemned it. Mexico called it a grave violation of international law. Brazil's President Lula da Silva said the kinetic action against a head of state crossed an unacceptable line.
You could just feel the widespread concern over sovereignty violations spreading through the region.
And as expected, Venezuela's allies, Russia, Cuba, and Iran, they quickly escalated their criticism. They called the strikes a gross violation of sovereignty and attack on international law.
Russia even called for an emergency UN Security Council session.
A specific target of the U.S. rhetoric, though, and a clear signal of future intent, was Cuba.
Yes. Secretary Rubio claimed that the personnel protecting Maduro and working inside the Venezuelan spy agency were full of Cubans.
Yeah.
He suggested Cuba had essentially colonized Venezuela from a security standpoint and was pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
And that provided the perfect segue for the president to issue a thinly veiled but very powerful threat to Havana.
He called Cuba a failing nation that they will end up talking about. He linked the instability in Venezuela directly to decades of Cuban influence, and it really set the stage for potential future action kinetic or economic against Cuba itself.
The rhetoric was clearly setting the stage for a massive reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine.
Right, that 19th century policy that views foreign intervention in the Western Hemisphere as a hostile act against the U.S.
Yeah.
But now, that doctrine is being backed by an unprecedented display of unilateral kinetic power and open economic seizure.
The entire scenario, the swift capture, the explicit oil rationale, the open declaration of administration, and the immediate dismissal of recognized opposition figures, it all just signals a profound shift.
The U.S. is prioritizing immediate unilateral control and economic self-interest over any kind of diplomatic engagement or traditional multilateral agreements. Sovereignty, in this new calculus, it seems, is negotiable if a nation holds strategic resources and harbors perceived U.S. adversaries.
What an extraordinary cascade of events Operation Absolute Resolve has set in motion. For the learner tuning in, let's just try to synthesize the three key, revolutionary takeaways from what happened on January 3rd, 2026.
First, the military precision and the scale were just unparalleled. Operation Absolute Resolve demonstrated this massive, overwhelming Force 150 aircraft, cross-agency intelligence, a zero-casualty outcome, all to achieve a direct military intervention and kinetic kidnapping of a head of state.
This level of directness, this efficiency, it sets a frightening new standard for intervention. Second, the justification. It shifted so dramatically from a conventional law enforcement operation capturing indicted narco-terrorists to an explicit, purely economic endeavor.
The seizure of the world's largest oil reserves and the commitment to subsidize U.S. companies to rebuild and extract that oil using Venezuelan wealth as collateral. The economic mechanism is the real story here.
And third, the geopolitical result. You have a sovereign nation that is effectively headless, with an openly declared U.S. plan for temporary administration and occupation. They're promising boots on the ground and financial reimbursement from the country's own wealth.
This open declaration of intent, it represents a profound break from really all post-World War II diplomatic norms.
This intervention went so far beyond the Cold War-era tactics of just backing militias or supporting subversion or fighting proxy wars.
This was a unilateral, kinetic removal of a recognized head of state, followed by an open declaration of economic and administrative control over the national assets. It's hard to imagine a more brazen move. And that really is the final thought we have to leave you with as you process this deep dive. By executing a direct seizure of a foreign leader and openly committing to running the country for resource extraction, while at the same time threatening other nations like Cuba, what are the long-term ramifications for the global legal framework?
Specifically for non-allied nations.
Exactly. What message does this bold, self-financing and unilateral action send to resource-rich countries all over the globe about the new, aggressive calculus of sovereignty in the face of absolute U.S. military and economic power? The rules that nations believe define their independence have just been aggressively rewritten, and the global community is waiting to see who is next.